Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the libertarian perspective on what's going on in the world. And I'm joined, as I am every week, by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
It's great to see you, and it's great to be back with our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, likewise. You'll have to pardon me, and please pardon me, you viewers. I got another hard allergy attack, and so, but we'll make it through another round of Libertarian Angle.
Well, there must be some strange way of catching these things, because I'm hundreds of miles away from you, and my eye is running, and so I must have caught your allergies.
Well, it could have something to do with what we're going to talk about today. We might both be allergic to what's happening today, and that, of course, is Election Day. I mean, what a joke, Richard. This thing really is a joke. At least for us libertarians. I mean, there really isn't any difference fundamentally between these two political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. And they act like they're different. I mean, that's what's really funny. I'm getting emails right now from both sides about get out the vote because the Democrats want to do this and the Republicans want to do this. And sometimes I respond to them, just because I have fun with them, saying, well, excuse me, but I don't really see any differences between the two of y'all, at least not in a fundamental sense. For example, some of them are talking about Medicare, and they're saying, the Democrats want Medicare for all. Well, that means the Republicans only want Medicare for some. But they both favor Medicare. They both favor Social Security, and they get these battles of, the Republicans want to abolish Social Security. Well, of course they don't. The Republicans make it very clear that they're as committed to this socialist program as the Democrats are. And then another big scare tactic, of course, is the one we've all become accustomed to, is the immigrants. The immigrants are invading America, and Trump's an absolute political genius. I mean, you got to really give the guy credit. He knows how to push the buttons, this caravan coming up to invade and conquer and take over the federal government. They're going to go into everybody's houses and pull them out, and now he's sending troops down there. I mean, the guy's a genius. He knows how to push the buttons. So I'm getting emails today saying, the Democrats favor open borders. Well, it's ridiculous. Democrats don't favor open borders. It's only we libertarians who favor open borders. Democrats favor the socialism, and that's what it is, of immigration controls. And they both favor this immigration police state that is coming to existence in the American Southwest, and that is now spreading across the country. And then look at the things that haven't been discussed. They're not even part of the campaign. These forever wars. You got American troops killing and dying in 7 different countries overseas, and not a mention of it in the campaign. And then you've got this racist, immoral, destructive war on drugs that's gone on for decades, and not a mention of it, because they both favor it, and they both favor all the foreign wars and the interventions and the coups and the partnerships with the dictators and the foreign aid to the dictators. So really, it's a great big yawner for me, Richard. I mean, if you're talking about just Democrats and Republicans, it's absolutely ludicrous. What do you think?
Well, the thing is that I too have been bombarded by these telemarketing audios over the phone. Mostly, I've gotten more Republican Party ones than Democratic ones, but some Democratic candidates. And basically, what it is, it's what has often been pointed out by advertisers. What sells? Fear and greed. Okay, link into those two, you can hook a lot of people. Now, what's the fear? Exactly what you said. You set up each side as a boogeyman. If the Democrats win, it will mean the end of the republic, the progressive agenda that wants to establish full Soviet-style socialism in America the day after that they take office. And then the Democrats are saying, we are just one tweet away from trumpeteers walking down Pennsylvania Avenue to a goose step and establishing a fascist state. Now, it is absolutely true that the Democrats are left-oriented in the typical way we talk about left political ideology. They do want bigger government. They want an extended interventionist welfare state. They want to regulate industry. And even now, the admitted socialists among them would like to nationalize some industry. They want to take from the Peters and give to the Pauls, given the ideology of redistribution that they believe in. And it's true about the Republicans. The fact is, as repugnant and as not inconsistent with the philosophy of liberty the Republicans have been for a long time, it has been accelerated, it's been exacerbated with the election of Donald Trump. Now, Trump, I personally think, is too stupid to even know what a fascist is. But he follows the same script as Obama had. He has a phone, he has a pen, and he's going to pass these executive orders. He's going to send the troops to the border. He's going to end birthright citizenship. He's going to do this. The arrogance, the hubris of whether it's an Obama or a Trump to believe that they are, in a sense, a king who has arbitrary authority to do whatever they want the way they want, and to tell us lies and exaggeration. It's as if Donald Trump invented fake news. That is, about himself. He exaggerates, he pulls numbers and facts and history out of a hat, often having little to do with the precise detail of false and truth. But have not the Democrats done this? Did not Obama do this? Did not Obama tell us, you can keep your doctor and your insurance once we establish the Unaffordable Care Act? So both have been hucksters, cheaters, con men on both sides of the political fence. And this is the case with this election. Will the Democrats, if they gain control of the House, push an interventionist and welfare statist agenda? Yes. But if the Republicans stay in power, will their rhetoric sometimes sound more traditional, constitutional American and pro-free enterprise? Yes, it will. But what will be the reality? It will be the reality that they will want to maintain Social Security, maintain Medicare, even extend them in ways. They'll kick down the road the debt problems of the country the same way the Democrats would. And they will carry out, as you just said, these foreign interventionisms. You know, the United States is shocked that the Saudi government has undertaken the assassination of a dissident Saudi court reporter who had been residing in the United States, and seemingly cut him into little pieces at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, and lied about it, bold-faced. He left the embassy. We don't know what happened. Oh, it must have been rogue this or rogue that. And all the time it's now coming out. He was grabbed the moment he stepped in the consulate. He may have been strangled or somehow else killed and then cut up into little pieces. And we're shocked by this. Shocked. But has the United States government been shocked? Has any public figures around the orbit of the government been shocked? Since the Obama years and now into the Trump years, when the United States has militarily and financially supported the Saudis in their intervention in the Arabian Peninsula country of Yemen, into a civil war there, in which both of those factions are statist, tribalist, collectivism. But the Saudis want to support the side that is opposing the other side that is pro-Iranian. So they're involved in their own regional power play. What does the United States do? It provides military armaments for the Saudis to have the missiles and the weaponry to be bombing Yemen with the cost of thousands, according to observers, thousands of innocent lives of men, women, and children who were just unfortunate to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Oh, excuse me, they're not people. It's called collateral damage. And the United States itself, from the time of Obama into Trump, what have they done, Jacob? Have they not sent American drones? Have they not targeted the people that they consider bad guys? Have they not resulted in their own direct collateral damage? And have they not even targeted Americans in that part of the world for drone attack without due process of law, without a public accusation of crime or the demonstrated guilt of that person in violating a crime or a criminal act under the U.S. legal code. No. These have been imperial presidencies of both the Democrats and the Republicans who have little regard for anyone's life, American or foreign, abroad, and who are willing to use the government in various and sundry collectivist ways to achieve their domestic ends, to serve their coalitions of special interest groups who provide them the funds to run for election and get reelected on election day. So the eating of at the public trough at the expense of the American consumer and taxpayer can continue. And that is the reality of American politics. Now, can you find one candidate, one particular party's platform more egregious or repugnant to yourself personally than another? Of course. And you may decide to vote, holding your nose and saying, oh, he's worse than him. Fine. Everybody has to make their own personal choice about these things. But behind it, the backdrop to all that you're focusing on in watching the circus of the election foreground is the fact that they are two parties that represent the same underlying ideology. The belief that the state must be the paternalistic regulator and provider and redistributor to the benefit of some at the expense of others. Both deny and refuse to accept and follow the principle upon which the country was founded, those principles of the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal, and that they are endowed with certain unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, of which happiness requires the recognition and respect of private property, for people to peacefully go about their affairs with government as the protector of rights and not the violator of rights. And both parties, whether say so as explicitly as the other party or nuance it, both violators of our rights. They are the legalized plunderers that Frederick Bastiat talked about in his famous monograph, The Law.
Yeah, your point about Khashoggi is very interesting. I mean, you've got the assassination of this guy, but if you look at any of the campaigns going around the country, on the congressional campaigns and the Senate campaigns, there's virtually nothing being said about it. And even if there is something said about it, at the very most, what they're going to say is, well, the Saudis should be punished. And by punished, they're saying, well, we should suspend some arms sales to them. But notice that none of them is challenging things at a fundamental level. And that's what we libertarians have been arguing, well, here at FFF for almost 30 years now. There should be no partnerships with dictatorial regimes. There should be no alliances with any foreign regime. And yet that has been the history of U.S. foreign policy since at least World War II. The partnership with dictatorial regimes, the installation of dictatorial regimes. We saw this in Iran, where the CIA ousted Mossadegh from power, who had been democratically elected, and they installed a Shah in. They help him train his police forces, his national security forces, to torture people, to kill people. That was the reason for the Iranian Revolution in '79. People had had enough of this dictator. We saw it in Chile. When they installed Pinochet into power, whose forces started raping women and doing horrible abuses of people that were taken into custody that amounted to about 50,000 people, virtually all of whom were tortured. And about 3,000 or 4,000 of them were killed because they believed in socialism. That was their crime. And we see it today, the partnerships with Egypt, which is a brutal right-wing dictatorial military dictatorship. And we see the partnership with the Saudi Arabians. So you don't see any of this talked about in this campaign. This horrific, immoral foreign policy of partnering with dictatorial regimes. You don't even see them challenging the whole concept of a national security state. For example, all the domestic military bases. You know, if a candidate runs for office and says, hey, we need to get rid of these things, what are they good for? I mean, you know, like in the 19th century, they had forts. Now, the military did, and it was a very small military force because our American ancestors would never have tolerated a federal government with a CIA and an NSA and a military-industrial complex. So the military was very small, but they had forts around cities to protect against Indian attacks, Native American attacks. Well, they still have those forts today. They've got military installations in cities and towns across the country. What are they good for? There's no more Indians. There's no more threat of an invasion from some foreign power of the United States. It's all military welfare. And these communities that have these military installations, they are scared to death because they're so dependent on this military welfare largesse. But boy, if a candidate even dares to suggest that he's not going to bring home the bacon to his state, man, the mainstream press goes ballistic and says he won't be an effective congressman. And as you point out, it's all about stealing. That each community is trying to get their hands on the loot that everybody blocks out of their mind is being taken by the Internal Revenue Service from everybody across the country. So everybody's trying to get his hands on the loot, but every April 15th, he's doing his best to find his deductions and his tax credits to protect his own money from being looted by his fellow citizens. And that's what this whole system is about, both with the military and the civilian welfare state. It's about everybody making war against everybody else. Everybody's trying to get his hands on the loot, on the plunder, but at the same time trying to protect his own pocketbook. And it's an immoral system. It's a destructive system. It's a system that involves people making war against each other, including intergenerational war, where seniors are trying to do their best to get their hands on the loot of young people through their Social Security largesse. And these young people, many of whom are having trouble starting out in life, they're delaying marriage, they're delaying buying a house because they just don't have the money because they're getting fleeced by people, many of whom that don't even need the money. You know, there's a lot of seniors that have plenty of money for retirement, and they still say, we got to keep this thing because I put it in. Well, nobody put it in, Richard. Everybody's been taxed to fund this welfare warfare state. And the problem in these campaigns is that you got Democrats and Republicans that both believe in the system and meanwhile block out of their minds that there's a huge debt that's forming, out of control federal spending to fund these welfare warfare state programs that none of them want to get rid of.
I think we need to remember, and I had mentioned him in the end of my previous remark, and that is Frederick Bastiat's famous essay, Monograph of the Law, published in 1850, shortly before Bastiat died of tuberculosis. And he points out that there's a variety of options for a society in terms of its political structure. One is in which the few plunder the many, by which he meant the king and its cohorts of noblemen and knights who use the power of the king to proceed to expropriate the wealth and control the actions and regulate the activities of the many for their own benefit. Then there is the plunder, or the form of government of the many attempting to plunder or expropriate from the few. That's what the Democrats talk about. The people, the vast majority of working and middle class people, they're harmed by the 1%. We need to take from the 1% to give to the many. But there's also another variation of that. And Bastiat once says that the state is the great fiction by which everyone tries to live at the expense of everyone else. And that is the situation which we really are in. The fact is that by forming pressure group coalitions of various and sundry types and gravitating around certain politicians or political parties, everyone is attempting to pick the pocket of everyone else. It could be for Medicare, it could be for Obamacare, it can be for Social Security, it can be for a government military base within a district that generates revenues for selected interest groups in that community, which that local politician assures will remain in place so the federal dollars flow there, subsidies, protections on trade, et cetera, et cetera. And it reaches the point where there's such these interconnected and intercrossing redistributions and regulations and controls and mutual plundering, that how does even anyone know anymore whether they're a net receiver of all of this or a net payer, or it just washes out with the huge cost of the society of this churning machine of extracting wealth from the society to pump it through the political machine, and therefore making us all poorer, even if the redistributive crossovers were all netting out in terms of I paid in as much money as I get back in these redistributions. We're all poorer just from the logic of the process of pouring the money in and then redistributing it through the hands of the state. And then there's the final way of society organizing itself, Bastian would say. And that is the state plunders no one. It merely protects the individual rights of every person to their life, their liberty, and their honestly acquired property from the private plundering of their neighbor, which of course can occur. But it itself remains the protector of rights and not the violator of rights. That was the ideal, the premise, this basic principle that guided pretty much the thinking of the founding fathers of our country. We have moved a long way. We've gone from government as secure and protector of our rights to government as the plunderer of our wealth, our freedom, a denier and an obliterator of our rights, to feed this vast machine of mutual redistribution in which nobody knows, have they won, have they lost, what's the cost of keeping the machine going, but it all amounts of using the state to take from the Pauls to give to the Peters, and then the Peters to give to the Pauls, and then the Peters and the Pauls plundered to satisfy some John or Sam or Bill, all of which then get sucked into the same vortex of mutual plundering with no end. And that's the road that we're following. And that's the nature of the political process. And behind all the hoopla and the rhetoric and the finger pointing and the panic about if he gets elected as opposed to me, it's all the same political game in which each wants to gain what the other members of the society have, not through peaceful exchange and mutual agreement and voluntary trade, but through the plundering hand of government coercion and police power to take from some to give to others.
Yeah, the battle between the Democrats and Republicans is one of power and money. That's what they're fighting over. It really is one political party, and it's divided into two wings. It's much like the National Football League or Major League Baseball. You've got one organization that's divided into two conferences or two divisions, and it doesn't matter. I mean, yeah, is there competition? Yeah, there's competition, but it's one entity. And this is what may be called the welfare warfare party. And so they have all these big political races and disputes and fights between each other, but it's all about power and money. They're trying to get control over the levers of power because they want power, and because with that power, in welfare warfare terms, comes largesse. Now, one of the things that people say to us sometimes, Richard, is that, oh, well, you guys favor anarchy. You favor no government at all. That this is so extreme. Like, you guys want to open the borders to the free movements of people. That means you don't believe in borders, and it's such nonsense. Because the problem is that since everybody has been born and raised in a welfare warfare state way of life, they cannot imagine what a limited government republic looks like. They can't even conceive of that. But that's essentially what America was founded on. For example, if you take 1880 America, there was no income tax, no IRS, no Federal Reserve System, no paper money, no drug war, no immigration controls, no foreign interventionism, no foreign wars, no CIA, no Pentagon, no NSA, none of the apparatus that we know today as the welfare warfare state. No Social Security, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no welfare. People were free to keep everything they earned and decide for themselves what to do with it. Was it anarchy? Was there the absence of government? Of course not. There was a federal government throughout the 19th century. It continued into the 20th century. There were state governments. There were borders, even though people were free to cross them. And it's that concept. Now, was it a perfect libertarian society? We know it wasn't. In 1880 America, the women didn't have the right to vote. There was Jim Crow laws coming into existence. But my point is that simply because you dismantle the welfare state functions, the warfare state functions, the plunder functions, doesn't mean that you have to dismantle the essential functions of government that are part of a limited government republic.
Yeah, part of the problem, I think, Jacob, is a terminological ambiguity, which I think is sometimes consciously fostered and certainly unintentionally. And that is not to make the distinction which some political philosophers have between law and legislation. Law can be viewed as those general, wide rules that are meant to apply to each one equally and unbiasedly to the securing of everyone's rights and liberty. Legislation are those particular acts that the government passes, which may sometimes properly reinforce the general rule of those wider laws meant to secure our liberty. But legislation has become the means by which the state passes acts that then enables them to interfere with the freedoms of the citizens. Now, because of this linguistic or terminology confusion, people presume, oh, you don't want the government to regulate, you don't want the government to redistribute, you don't want the government to protect, you don't want the government to, well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You want to abolish these interventionist bits of legislation. Therefore, you're against law. And no, when Frederick Bastiat, in his famous essay, talked about the law, he meant those general, abstract rules of interpersonal just conduct, of respecting the rights of your neighbor to their life, liberty, and property, just as you want him to respect your rights to those things. And that since sometimes individuals cannot be trusted to always act honorably and justly and non-aggressively towards their neighbor, it is necessary to form a joint association, which we have historically called government, that is meant to protect and secure the rights. Now, the problem that has always been faced is who guards us from the guardians. That was the purpose of a constitution. Congress may pass no law. Beautiful words, some of the most beautiful words ever said in the history of mankind. Congress may pass no laws against freedom of speech, freedom of press, no search and seizure without a warrant, no self-incrimination, on, including the meant to a person to be secure in his person and his property without legal just cause to restrict or deny them. That is what we were based upon, and that is law. Those general rules of just conduct, of protecting of our individual rights, which government is to protect. But as I said, who guards us from the guardians? It was the giving up of the fundamental principle and idea that people in the 19th century had more in their mind. As you said, were there egregious violations of people's freedom and liberty? Of course, and we could have a long list of those. But the underlying premise was that government is the securer of rights and not violator. And therefore, when people proposed government to do things that would be violating liberty as opposed to protecting it, people often made an outcry, or there was a sizable percentage in the population who said that is not what our country is about. But we lost that with the rise of collectivist and socialist and interventionist ideas, that the government is not the securer, but redistributor, using redistribution, the broadest sense of the government using its power in some way to give a benefit to Joe that's been taken away or denied to Sam. Now, when we do that, we realize that what is not securing our liberty is not that the Constitution is not, as it's often said, a noble document meant to secure our freedoms, but people have lost the understanding of what the law and the Constitution is supposed to be about. And once people lose those things, then the Constitution, unfortunately, increasingly becomes just a piece of paper with no power behind it.
Yeah, your point about the First Amendment's interesting, where it says Congress shall pass no law respecting the infringement on freedom of speech. Is that I think you got an interesting point, that maybe the big mistake was just not putting a period after Congress shall pass no law. But yeah, Richard, these are the two big issues that should have been debated in this election. What does it really mean to be free? I mean, this is what American people that they need to confront. What is the meaning of freedom? Does freedom entail a society where there is mandatory charity, where people are coerced into helping others? Is it possible to even reconcile that with a genuine definition of freedom? So that's the first thing that should have been discussed during this campaign. The second thing, what is the role of government in society? That if you're striving for a free society, what should government be doing and what should it not be doing? Should it be mandating that people help others? That children should be forced to care for their parents? Or should this be a matter of voluntary choice, of voluntary charity? And until people start debating and confronting those two questions, I think we're going to still keep suffering under this morass of socialism and interventionism under the guise of freedom. You see, that this is part of this whole concept that people have to be convinced that the welfare warfare state is freedom, and then they're thankful. They're oh, thank God I'm an American because at least I know I'm free. And it's Goethe's famous line that says, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." And that line really captures the plight of the American people, because they honestly believe that the welfare warfare state way of life is freedom. And then on the foreign policy side, should government, the American government, be involved in coups, assassinations, torture, kidnappings, secret surveillance, invasions, wars of aggression, foreign interventionism, foreign meddling, or should it be a constitutionally limited government republic that has the power to do none of those things? That's what should have been debated in this campaign.
You know, I was watching the Trump News Network, Fox News this morning, and as opposed to the Commie News Network, CNN, and Fox, of course, always wanting to be fair and balanced. I had one of their reporters at a voting booth, right? The voting booths opened in many states at around 7 a.m. And so they asked him, why are you voting today? And this fellow said, because I want freedom. The Democrats get elected, it's down the toilet. Now, I agree. That's, no loaded rhetoric there. Now, I happen to think that whenever the Democrats in power, we are going down the toilet. But you see, the gentleman's assumption, however sincerely held, and probably a believer in the rhetoric and even personally many of the principles of freedom, as you and I would understand them, has falsely or erroneously or incompletely understood that the side that he has chosen to support, the Republicans, implicitly by his statement, are not the proponents of freedom. Is it true that historically, when the Republicans have been in office, they've often passed fewer directly socialist and egregious pieces of legislation as the Democrats sometimes have had? Yes. But it's like two cars going down a highway towards a cliff. And one is going 100 miles an hour, and the other is going, let's say, 85 or 90 miles an hour. Now, does it mean that the car going 85 will reach the cliff edge later than the other car? Absolutely. But both are going in the same direction. And in fact, with Trump, both are going almost at the same speed in terms of the practical reality of what government is doing. It is Trump who, with all the Republican stuff about the spendthrift policies of the Democrats, it is under Trump and a Republican majority in both houses of Congress that we are now returning to trillion-dollar-a-year budget deficits, and therefore the growth of the national debt, and therefore this strangle of financial burden over the current and future generations. That's our children and grandchildren, who, whether we like it or not, are going to be stuck paying the interest on this accumulating and growing debt. And then the issue of what happens when the principal can't even be paid anymore, and the country is facing serious financial difficulties if these patterns and trends continue. They're both doing this. It is Trump who's increasing the defense budget. It is Trump who does not want to change Social Security or Medicare. It is Trump who talks about tax breaks, but is part of this idea of making America great again through economic nationalism, in which he's attempting, as the Republicans used to accuse the Democrats a few decades ago, using the government to pick winners and decide who's a loser. We're going to have American jobs in these industries, in those locations, by restricting imports and giving support through tax breaks to these industries as opposed to those others. This is all the same playbook, just with a slightly different rhetoric and who's benefited as opposed to who's losing. And I understand the gentleman's concerns, but he's looked in the wrong direction if he really thinks that there will be any change or preserving of liberty if one party gets elected and retains control over Congress as opposed to the other.
On that fine note, Richard, we're out of time, and we'll call it end to this particular segment of Libertarian Angle. As always, I greatly enjoyed the conversation, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in. If you want to get more of our uncompromising libertarian perspectives, come and visit us at fff.org. Richard, look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time, thank you, viewers, for joining us.